Hi, and thanks for tuning into SOCMA's podcast, where I sit down for a fireside chat on current trends affecting the specialty chemical sector. I'm Jennifer Abril, President and CEO of SOCMA. In this episode, we have a SOCMA double header. This time, I talk with my colleague at SOCMA, Joe Dettinger, about the state of the specialty chemical sector at the mid 2024 mark. Let's dive into it.
Hi, welcome back to the SOCMA podcast. This one is an all SOCMA all-star lineup. So today I'm excited to welcome to the podcast Joe Dettinger. Joe is a fellow SOCMA employee with me here. And I wanted to talk with Joe this time and introduce y'all to Joe if you don't already know him. Because earlier this year, Joe added our commercial services element to his portfolio. Joe has been with us for 5 years, and he's been working in the manufacturing and operations side of the business for us, working on safety issues and EHS issues, but had an added element to his portfolio, and that's all of our commercial services here at SOCMA, which is so important. So wanted to do a check-in, see how we're doing with state of the industry and what you're seeing. So Joe, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, for having me on the podcast today.
All right. So with that intro, talk to me a little bit about how this first 6 months has been with the new added role. What are you seeing? What's been interesting to you? I know you've been around this work that SOCMA has been building on our commercial side for quite a while, but talk to us about what it's like running this element of our services.
Absolutely. So, like you mentioned, I have been around SOCMA for a while, overseeing the manufacturing ops pillar and always working in the background on the commercial pillar. So it was a natural transition for me. But some of the things that are happening that I'm really particularly fond of is talking with the members, talking with prospect members as well, and learning what's going on out there and seeing, kind of getting a picture of what they're seeing and how they're ready to, to move forward and such, and really learn and just see how SOCMA can better help these companies grow their businesses.
Yeah. And what's so rewarding is how much people are willing to share with us, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it fits in well because of my background coming from industry. I connect
Mhm.
very well with them because of that industry connection. So
Absolutely. Okay. So with that, tell us, what opportunities are you seeing? Like, we're 6 months in to 2024, right? We're mid-year. So as a check-in, I know we like to do some pulse polls. We do some check-in with our industry colleagues and various members throughout the calendar year. What are we seeing? Are you seeing a lot of opportunities when it comes to North American chemical manufacturing? Because as you well know, that is our remit, is to grow the North American specialty chemical sector. So what are we seeing out there? What are you people telling you?
absolutely. So as we run these polls, as we talk with various folks in the industry, we hear a lot about onshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, right? And the opportunities that that provides the manufacturing space. So think of materials that were manufactured in Europe, for instance. They have a very strong possibility of coming back to the U.S. simply because of the energy crisis that was happening over there and continues to, be somewhat problematic. But also, you're seeing supply chain shorten, right? So they want to manufacture close to the
Mm.
customer. And that just provides a lot of prime environment for our manufacturers here in North America. And North America, right? It's not just the US, it's
Right.
Canada and Mexico. And
Absolutely.
all three countries are prime for manufacturing these materials.
Yeah. So that's super optimistic, things that are within the traditional customer base. What about some of the other things that have popped up in SOCMA's world in the last year and a half, which is um, sourcing for the US government? I know you've done a lot of work for us and for our members to develop relationships there. So make sure everybody knows what's happening when it comes to supply chain assurance, supply chain security from a a US government point of view?
Absolutely. So obviously, one of the things that the government wants to do is repatriate the manufacturing of these materials. And what we're seeing is that the government has made many steps, including those in the DoD sector around critical chemicals. We've seen Call 12 come out. We've seen awards be placed for those. We're also awaiting what is known as Call 13 or DC-3, which is Defense Critical Chemicals Call, which will be a list of materials that are needed for mainly military purposes around energetics and the precursors to manufacture energetics. So there's a lot going on in that space for DoD. However, it doesn't end there, right? There are other opportunities in DOE, Department of Energy, and also there's just a general need. So we don't have to wait for the critical chemicals call to be released. These materials are housed inside of the US government and the ways that they channel information out. We can get into those now and evaluate the chemistries and see what we could be manufacturing here. So it's important to know that we don't have to wait for the critical chemicals call to come out.
Yeah, and you did a great webinar along with another SOCMA colleague a couple weeks ago, I want to say about a month ago, about where we stand on that. And some of the timing related to that looks to be closer to the end of this year or sometime into 2025 or later this year. What's the timing on when we should hear something on the defense critical chemicals call that people originally heard about during our trade show in February?
Yeah, so what we're hearing now is it's should be released before the end of the government's fiscal year,
Okay.
which would be the end of September.
Okay.
So sometime between now and the end of September, we should be seeing something come out around this critical chemicals call.
Great. Additionally, we've been looking at additional investments, CapEx that people have done. What are we seeing in terms of capacity here in the US for a lot of the projects that are being kind of floated? What are you seeing there? And what's the mood generally?
Right. So capacity is very interesting. What we're seeing based on our polls is that approximately 25% of respondents are saying that they have less than 10% capacity available. So these things are, capacity like that's going to end up spurring CapEx to continue to grow, or it could be moving into additional time on the floor. So if it's a 24/5 company, they may end up becoming a 24/7 or such.
Yep.
But we're also seeing about 60% of companies that have between 10 and 20% capacity availability inside of the organization. So again, as we see the reshoring, as we see some of these critical chemicals come to fruition, that's going to spur growth opportunities across the sector. As far as optimism is we call it optimistically high or cautiously high. I think it's edging even a little bit higher than that because we just came from an event 2 weeks ago where we ran a poll, had about 10% respondents to that poll, and we're seeing some really, really good trends on that optimism side. It's really, trending 60-70%. So that's good to see and good to know.
So just to be certain, so that that survey that you just did, I think I remember you saying you had almost 100 respondents to that survey. So 60% of 100, I mean, that's a pretty good
Yes.
indicator. And we've got different ways that we do those polls throughout the year just to make sure we've always got a pulse on where the industry stands. So sounds like here, by the time we're mid-year, at this mid-year point, we started out high, there's a little softening, but the optimism is still carrying forward.
That's correct. Yeah, we saw 24 started off really, really strong for a lot of companies. I'd argue most companies. And it seems to be sectors or market segment specific. But those companies were very strong. They did see a little bit of softening in the second quarter, but optimism is really high for the remainder of the year.
Well, that's super positive. What about some of the challenges that people talk to you about? So what are the concerns? Because we obviously want to help the sector grow, but where are some of the pinch points or areas of watchouts that you've been hearing about?
Right. It's the regulatory environment,
Yeah.
specifically around new chemicals and the PMN process. I think looking at the new chemicals, that becomes a little bit problematic. But we also have things that we're focusing on and watching closely, and that's specific regulations around PFAS, methylene chloride, things of that nature that tend to just lend themselves to be a little bit more problematic with manufacturing new chemistry.
How about things around other areas that could potentially limit upward growth? So an example that comes to mind is, workforce challenges are a perennial concern. What kind of twists are you hearing on workforce challenges these days?
Right. So workforce remains an issue, and it's going to be an issue for the foreseeable future. We've talked with a couple of people, and one of our members specifically had mentioned that he needs additional 50% of his workforce 5 years from now in order to continue growing. That's a huge increase in employment that is needed. So that's obviously a concern, but we're hearing more about technology, automation, things like that that can be put in place to help with efficiencies and just help continue the growth despite the lack of some of the employment issues.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we just came off of a board visioning session to help us build out our SOCMA 2030 plan. And the difference in the conversation around automation or technology usage or AI considerations a few years ago, or even 2 years ago versus where we are now, is really interesting. There's a big shift happening. But it sounds to me, much more interest in trying to find ways to bring in smartly some of those investments, because we just can't find the workforce that we had access to in the past. So how else can we get to our goals? But I know one of the things that also comes up is, where do you make those investments when you have an older facility? And so many of us are operating with older facilities. So how do you actually take an older plant and put new technology on that? Those are some of the real considerations and opportunities for collaboration or information sharing across the industry that I know our board was looking for us to facilitate.
Absolutely. It's definitely a challenge, and it's a no-brainer when you're building a new plant, right? Or you're building out a new portion of your plant. You're going to want to put automation in as much as you can, and as much as you're, comfortable with manufacturing the products that you're manufacturing. But it truly is a challenge to set up the backbone for an aging infrastructure. In some cases, it's through the preventative maintenance process, where you can start updating different parts of the equipment so that you can then embed the technology into that portion of it. But it does take a bit of time in order to work through that process. But it's being done. It's out there. It's being done currently.
And with your also the other hat, which is the manufacturing and operations pillar of SOCMA, I imagine that's something that you'll be working with your team to bring into SOCMA's, broaden out what we bring in terms of areas for improvements and technology integration and things like that. That's a new area that we'll be working on.
Absolutely. And I've been blessed to work with two engineers in that department as well. And the three of us came from industry, and because of that, we can turn around and we can help our members look at where they may be able to take an opportunity to embed some of this and build it out. So yes, we are looking forward to working on this with our member companies.
Another thing that has come up around challenges that I know you've mentioned before that you've heard about are things like uncertainty out there, cost of money, inflation. Talk a little bit about that for our listeners.
Yeah, so our current environment is rich for uncertainty, and we have, tax issues out there, specifically around R&D tax credits and companies that want to move down that R&D approach, but they're limited on cash and such. We also have interest rates that are rather high right now that may delay CapEx, at least until more certainty comes about. I would imagine, and what I'm hearing is that later in this year, after we get past the November timeframe, certainty will then be a little bit more visible, and we'll be able to take an approach that we can feel comfortable with from the business side of growing the companies.
More predictability.
Absolutely.
And then what about things like so SOCMA maintains a directory of capabilities and chemistries that our members are able to produce, or what they have available. So as you've taken a dive into that, what are you seeing? Like, what's important to know? What should people know from some of your analysis and what's been revealed since you've taken this role on?
A couple things to know. One is, as a member, you get that tile in our member services directory, and that tile is the most visited web page on SOCMA's website. So it has a lot of views. Over 1,200 views a month are getting hit on that web page. So that's number one. Number two is that we have a lead sheet program. The lead sheet program is a free service for non-members or members who want to find a manufacturing partner to create chemistry for them. And we are seeing some gaps inside of different technologies, specifically distillation, filtration, crystallization, drying, right? Those are a couple of technology gaps that are out there. Also, on the chemistry itself, the chemistry side, we're seeing that oxidation and the alkylation are two of the reaction chemistries that are up there and are a true need at this point in time.
So if there are companies out there that are listening to us that work in these spaces, they should get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Give us a call so that we can, look at the capabilities that they have, and let's just talk. Yeah.
Yeah. See if we can make a match there.
Absolutely.
You talked a little earlier about optimism. So do you have any gauge on what the rest of 2024 is looking like? What are people expecting for the remainder of this year, the last 2 quarters?
Right. As I mentioned, we conducted a poll a couple of weeks ago, and 60% of the respondents are saying that they feel like the remainder of the year is going to be strong. So a strong start, kind of a slump in the center, and a strong finish to the year, which is really, really positive. We also conduct here at SOCMA, we conduct an outlook survey. So last year we created a 2024 outlook survey. This year we're working on a 2025 outlook survey, which will help us get yet a better glimpse into what's going to be happening for the remainder of this year and into next year. That survey is currently being pulled together now, and we will be releasing that information later in this year.
Okay, so when we do that survey, I know there are a lot of people that do outlooks, but there's something unique about the SOCMA outlook survey that we started last year. So talk a little bit about what's unique there.
So there's a couple of things that are unique. One is we pull together a panel of companies from the buyer perspective, from the manufacturing perspective, from the financial perspective. And we look at the different pieces of information that are needed in order to arm us with the information and the trends that we believe are going to happen next year. So we pull that group together. They help us create the questions. We use a third party to send the survey out. And then after we get the results back, that same group helps us decipher the information that we received, and we'll pull together a report that we disseminate to the companies.
Yeah. So really we're getting a perspective on what's needed in the specialty chemical sector for next year from both the buyer's perspective on what are they going to need, right? What are they going to be looking for? And the contract manufacturing perspective around what do they have available and what equipment, what kind of chemistries will be available, and see if we can make those matches together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really is, it's been a tough year from a predictability standpoint, right? People started out high, as you said. There's been a little bit of a slowdown in the middle section here, but it seems to be continuing to pick up again, which is a great place to be. Any other insights that you can think of that our members or our listeners would want to know about? Anything that you're working on or anything that you think that they should know about what SOCMA's planning?
Absolutely. So SOCMA is always working on things that are beneficial to our membership and to the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
We have a lot of different opportunities to be involved in the organization. Plus, we have a lot of products that are usable by the industry. Specifically on that manufacturing ops pillar, we have chem ops training that we can use to help educate the workforce. But we also have different meetings, roundtable meetings that we host, and we pull together a group of people so that they can talk about the common things that they're seeing in their world. So in a few months, we will be in Houston. And then later in this year, we're going to have our summit, which is we'll have an executive trend to that, and we'll focus on some of these important aspects that we can then share with what the remainder of this year looks like, but also what 2025 would look like from the manufacturing outlook.
Well, thank you for giving us such a great recap. It is good to kind of compare notes with you. I know a lot of people are looking for benchmarks to see how they're doing compared to what we're hearing. So thank you for joining me here. And obviously everybody now knows that if they want to get more information, more intelligence on what's going on from a industry trend perspective, benchmarking, any of the commercial services or any of our safety, EHS, sustainability activities, that they can come to you. Joe, thanks so much for doing this with me, and we'll do it again.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. I hope to see you back here for our next one. In the meantime, check out SOCMA.org or our LinkedIn feed for links to other podcasts and SOCMA programs.